Hey there, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today, I'll be taking a look at a really beautifully produced book. This is Mathieu Bablet's The Midnight Order from Magnetic Press. Magnetic always does great job with their books. One of the features that I always point out about their books that I quite like is they have these rounded corners, which I think A, is just kind of classy looking, and B, seems to keep them cleaner on the shelf. They don't get beat up as easy. But you can see this really intricate piece of art here that's rendered in foil on the cover, and there's these really nice foil designs all over the book. The pages themselves actually have this printed on them on the side, so it just looks like a really classy book. When I first opened this and got it, I told Tori, I was like, God damn it, this book is sexier than Abolition of Man. And they even have like this dark with like a gold kind of printing in here, which is something we did on Abolition as well. But yeah, it's all really beautiful, and one of those books where you just like, oh yeah, I just love having this on my shelf. It's just sexy design. I was really excited to get this because I do quite like Mathieu Bablet's art, and like I said, I really like everything that Magnetic puts out. One thing I noticed as a production difference from most of Magnetic's stuff is that this book is printed on a matte paper. It's not glossy, and that's just interesting. I'm used to seeing Bablet's art on glossy paper because his colors are so rich and everything. That makes sense, but this gives it a little bit more of a toned down look. I'm not sure that I like the computer colors so much on this toned down look. Like, I think those do look good glossy, whereas something that's like, if it's colored with watercolors or gouache, oftentimes looks nicer on a matte paper because it matches the materiality better. But I think it works well for this. It definitely tones everything down a little bit and makes it a little more neutral, which might have been intentional on the artist's part, or just like as they're designing this package, like having big shiny glossy pages inside of a package that is meant to look a little bit older and more archaic. Makes sense that they would go with the matte paper. So from a design standpoint, I totally get it. This book is all about the Midnight Order, which is a coven of witches throughout the time, basically. So you get the sense that the book is also designed around, like we did with Abolition. It's supposed to look like this old archaic tome for the witches, witches, pun not intended, which is strange given that it's all so sci-fi. So it's just an interesting like mashup of things. But you can see Bablet's artwork still is very steeped in like this knack for perspective and more of a sci-fi approach to things. So the two main characters here are, we have Sheridan, these are their last names, and Johnson. They are part of the Midnight Order, and it's their job to go out and stop witches who have gotten too powerful or are going to be a problem, basically kill them and bring them in. Johnson here also is hoping to be promoted to be like the head of the team, which is called the Executioner, and that's this person with this kind of like a Hellboy devil mask on here. So that's the basic premise of the book, basically, is that you have these people that are going to go out and hunt witches, and then there's something that I wasn't expecting. I guess I just, I just know it's Mathieu Bablet, and so I went and ordered it. I didn't realize this was a collaborative project with Mathieu Bablet and a bunch of other artists and a couple different writers, like building out a world. So you get a bunch of sequences that are drawn by other artists, and I'll go through and show those, which I think is really cool because you have a more established artist, it looks like, in Mathieu Bablet, coming in and bringing all these other good artists, or at least not as known over here in the States, but maybe known in the scene, in the European scene, I'm not sure. But a lot of other artists are brought into and given exposure in this comic. And some of them really shine, some of them do great, and some of them are like, but it's not an anthology book so much as like one continuous story with these breaks in the narrative that allow for these structured breaks and in between scenes and stuff that allow for other artists to come in. So this artist here goes by the name Alanva. A lot of these have a very manga meets western. They're very international. You can see here there's a very like Naoka Urasawa type of face on the old man. There's some more like anime style faces here. This character looks like a little bit more Boom Studio style. and then you have some very like scratchy artwork over here showing child's art. So really diverse in the approach, the kids drawing throughout here. So that one's really interesting. And this is basically just them on a mission taking out one of these witches. There are a lot of bits in here that are it's a little strange. There's a lot of these other documents stuffed in here. Some of them are just essays, like for the reader, basically, that are historical essays. They're not really set within the world of the comic. They're just like someone who does like some kind of cultural studies or something like that, doing slightly academic essays on some topics related to the history of witches, how the term's been used. Like here they go into the history of hysteria. So it's very much coming from like a gender studies or women's studies, feminist standpoint, where they're going through like how these terms have been used to hurt and abuse women throughout time. So the history of abuse that's attached to the words like witch and hysteria, which is like interesting information, but feels very jarring in the middle of a story that doesn't really have content like that. In the story, they're just like these powerful people in this agency making sure, and witches are presented like they're legitimate witches. They're not just calling that because they're powerful women, and some of them are actually dangerous and need to be stopped. So it's just a little bit of a strange thing to insert in there. It almost, I don't know, it just distracted from the story to me and took what was just kind of a straightforward story about, as you'll see, about like sisters and stuff and the character development, and started mapping, like this political outlook on things that just didn't vibe with the rest of the book to me. Here we have another mission. We're going all over the world. I believe this one is in Zambia, and this is drawn by Thomas Rouzier. You have like these two water creatures that go and battle. You can see this is again, this very international mix of influences here, like a broken Miyazaki line, but with some strange, like just use of choppy shapes and lines and no feet. So really interesting to see how these styles are coming together. I wish that in all of this mixture of international styles, we were seeing less computer art. I feel like that's what the American market contributed, and it's just making everything crappier. So I wish we hadn't impacted those other markets in that way, because usually when you look back at European stuff pre-computer, they were doing stellar stuff. Now, part of the reason I was saying that those little essays that get put in there, beyond the fact that they just seem more didactic or pedantic, they're like really trying to tell you something in the way you should think about things. There's these other bits in here that are actually diegetic, in that they're supposed to exist within the story. Sean taught me that term. It's like if you have a character turn on the radio in the car and you hear a song that's supposed to be part of the actual scene. It's called diegetic. It's not just soundtrack in the background. So a diegetic document in comics is a comic that's supposed to, or a document that's shown in the book that's supposed to exist within the world. And these things, you get these documents here that do exist within the world of the comic. And so to mix in those essays gets like extra strange in that context. Now, maybe this was originally printed as single issues and this is collected or something, and that information was just back matter that they wanted to keep, but then I would have kept that as like back matter in the book. Also, within the structure of this book, you keep coming back to these sequences at base, and you have basically the first two stories seem to be like flashback stories that are setting stuff up. Then you keep coming back to base, which is drawn by Mathieu Bablet, and then you start to involve on the third mission, you start learning about Johnson's sister, Billy. This is drawn by the artist Roers. And again, you can see this kind of international style with a big manga influence, but the computer coloring and all of that Not as big of a fan of the art in this one, probably partially just because of the computer coloring mixed with like these weird watercolor effects back here. But you start to introduce Billy's sister as the main witch that's got too much power, the main one of concern. And so that basically covers the rest of the book. It definitely feels like something that should have been maybe more of an ongoing series where these flashbacks and other missions, there was more of that. But because it's like, well, we got to finish this story, you show two and then you set up the main conflict with the sister. Some really lovely art in this section by the artist named Sumi, someone working, and here you can see that more international style on display. This mix up of like some manga tropes, definitely some more like Bastien Vives like European cartooning, these flatter colors, things that look more physically done, even though there still is some computer manipulation to them. I just think this section, like the use of colors especially, is done in a much more tasteful way, and it makes for a much more interesting visual finished product. I particularly love these like painted panels here. The abstraction and design on those is great. So love that art, love that section of the book. I want to read this one paragraph from these essays so you can get a sense of what these essays are like in terms of having that very strong philosophical and political view on the world that they're trying to kind of convince people of. Recognition is not reconciliation. Not only is recognition not reconciliation, something we are a long way from achieving, but the Aborigines should not have to be recognized by Westerners to validate their existence. I think that's a really strange idea. Really strange idea there that that recognition could have anything to do with validating someone's existence is fucking bananas to me. You're on the planet. You exist. You don't need anyone else to recognize that to exist. You are not a fucking quantum waveform that needs to be seen to turn into a particle. That's such a toxic idea that sets into this way of thinking, that you need other people to see you, to agree with you, to validate your existence. There is no such thing as validating your existence. You exist. So if you think anyone is invalidating your existence, that's because you have a strange fucking view of the world. So there's some of that stuff that seems completely unnecessary within the book to me, which is really a book about sisters and having to make a very hard decision about sisters, about a relative when they're going wrong. Now, that could be seen as tied to this like social political commentary that's in these strange interstitial essays, in the sense of like making a hard choice when someone's doing wrong. They could be making some larger social commentary there, but I don't know. I just didn't see it. I think it was like, here we're doing a book about witches. The public is obviously misinformed about how women have been abused and called witches, and so we need to put this stuff in there. It's just strange. It's weird because the story and the art's great. Otherwise, this art is by Daphne Collington, again an artist that I think has some really powerful visuals on page. Is obviously using some computer tools, but is developing a style that is specific to her, that has like a unique voice to it, where the computer colors don't just do the obvious doorknob rendering computer color thing. There's actual palette decisions being made and tone decisions being made, decisions about shape, and just using the flat colors in most places. It's just, this is a complete artistic package rather than someone who did line art and then got through some color on it as a separate process. Then to further make like the strange kind of insertions of the book stranger, now we have a bit of written narrative that fits in with the larger narrative, and you read it like a chapter. And this one's actually important for filling in between the interstitial, but there's no real reason given within the story why this is like a journal in the story. It's not a diegetic text. It's just another narrative strategy, which I really like that comics are trying to figure out how to incorporate more modes of presenting information. They're becoming more multimodal, but this, I don't know, this is strange. And when you stuff these essays and these diegetic kind of in-world documents and stuff in there, there's like different modes within the interstitial matter where they just, how they relate to the book is constantly changing and shifting in a way that I don't know added anything in particular to the story. At this point in the book, I'll admit I was getting pretty bored of the story. That reading that body of text was where I just tapped out. You know, I got a couple pages in, and all of the stuff that I found compelling about the story, this moral, ethical dilemma, personal, just emotional dilemma that a character's having about having to kill a sibling or someone they love, really just gets like bulldozed over with all of this kind of political commentary, and then just with trying to make the book trickier than it needs to be with all this interstitial stuff that really, for my money, didn't add much to the emotional, and I just started getting bored. So then by that point, I was pretty uninvested in the story, I'll admit, and I knew we're coming to a final countdown between the sisters. There's going to be some magic and some action, some cool art here by Tidwan Bielin, but I was just flipping through, checking out the art at this point. Another artist that I really liked in here, this Claire Fauvel, someone again who, even though they are using computer colors and effects, seems to have figured out a personal and particular way of using those materials. Oftentimes flatter colors, more subdued, with these interesting gradients going on in the background. So really quite like the artwork in that section. Some of like the philosophical political worldview makes it into some of what the characters are saying here in an interesting way. So Johnson, or no, this is the big god creature that they're trying to fight now, is coming up and says, pawns tearing each other apart for an order whose goal is to maintain a status quo that helps no one, which is forcing young generations to sacrifice themselves instead of forcing the world to change. And that also, that last little bit there, I like the idea that, like, hey, you're holding the youth to some of these old, like, combative ideas. That seems like a good message. But then at the end here, this idea of, instead of forcing the world to change, forcing young generations to sacrifice themselves instead of forcing the world to change. I don't know how this group of creators views that. Like, how are you gonna force the world to change? It almost seems like a condemnation, like you haven't gone and done this. I don't know, again, it's just some weird views on things. And then you get more evidence of the just fantastical worldview that goes into some of this in this last set of essays. This is again by Claire Barb, who wrote all of the essays. Barb. It says, when Donald Trump was elected president of the United States, witches gathered around Trump Tower to cast a collective spell. In 2017, the witches of Witch Block Panama joined in a demonstration against labor laws. They arrived masked and hooded, brandishing signs bearing the slogan, "Throw Macron in the cauldron." The idea that people proclaiming themselves witches gathered around Trump Tower and cast a spell is fucking absurd to me, because you've got this like far left wing that's gone so far it's wrapped back around to the superstitious magical worldviews of the far right and the Christians, and you're casting a spell on a building that a dude built, and obviously it didn't do anything. I don't know. I just don't get what they think they're going to convince people of in these essays. Like, that witches are useful, that I don't know, like go have fun. If it's a useful story for you, I'm glad you have faith in a story that makes your life better. But the almost evangelical nature of some of the content in this book, in terms of, yeah, like this particular worldview that they really want you to get on board with, rather than just telling a story about what happened to the characters and how it affected their lives and the human impact of that, which could really make people feel it from an emotional point instead of just being told it from a lecture standpoint. I feel like they got that balance wrong in the book, and so it eventually turned me off as a reader, which is too bad because going into it, there's a lot of cool art. Mathieu Bablet is usually in his works really kind of smart with the science fiction and really philosophical, the way he picks the world apart and the consequences of science and technology. This just feels like it went off the rails somewhere, like too many people got involved and it doesn't have a real true focus, which is always the danger of a collaborative thing. But I do think it's a beautiful book. Parts of it were really interesting to me, and there's a lot of gorgeous art in it and a lot of artists I'm going to follow up on. So this one, I would say, like, for the visual appeal of it, for the cool book on the shelf, if you're into witches and that kind of thing, get it. If the narrative essay stuff that I'm pointing in there sounds more interesting to you, then yeah, absolutely grab this book. It's a beautiful book. It would be really fun to read, and I think there are a ton, like they're saying in this final essay, there are a ton of youth especially getting interested in myth and mysticism and symbolism and stuff again, and I think that's all great. I think we need to return to having some more mythological input on our worldview. So this would be a good book for someone who wants more information on that. It's just, personally, I thought it was a little bit preachy in a way that interrupted any kind of ability to emotionally attach to the story.